Good evening. We'll call this meeting of the Legislation Committee to order, and I'll begin by reading the notice. Board of Alders Notice, New Haven. The Legislation Committee of the Board of Alders will be in person on Tuesday, November 12th, 2024 at 6:00 p.m. in the Board of Alders Chamber, located at 165 Church Street, second floor, New Haven, Connecticut, to hear and act on the following items. 1. OR-2024-0020, zoning ordinance text amendment of the New Haven Board of Alders, amending New Haven zoning ordinance sections 11B, 12B, 12.5B, 13B, 19, Table 1, summary schedule of permitted uses in residence districts, and 42, Table 3, use table Q, to permit by right the use of child daycare centers, group daycare homes, and family daycare homes in the RS1, RS2, RS3, RM1, BC, and MU zoning districts. 2. OR-2024-0025, zoning ordinance text amendment of the New Haven Board of Alders, amending New Haven zoning ordinance, section 19, table 1, summary schedule of the permitted uses in residence districts to include the RS3 zone and to permit by right the use of child daycare centers, group daycare homes, and family daycare homes in all residential zones, and section 19, table 2, summary of density, bulk, parking, and loading regulations to include the RS3 zone, remove the business and industrial districts, incorporate the previously approved revisions to minimum lot width and minimum lot area and the RS1, RS2, RM1, and RM2 zones, and to establish Article 3, Section 20, summary of uses and bulk regulations for residential districts, which tables 1 and 2 will be relocated. Number 3, OR-2024-0033, ordinance amendment to the New Haven Code of Ordinances regarding the Fair Rent Commission, Chapter 12 and 3/4, Fair Rent Practices. And to hold the following workshop of the New Haven Board of Alders with the Fair Rent Commission to provide an update regarding the status of the tenants unions. Per order, Honorable Ellen Cupo, Chair, attest, Honorable Michael Smart, City Town Clerk. These items are on file and available in the office of the City Clerk, located at 200 Orange Street, Room 202, New Haven, Connecticut 06510. For accessibility related accommodations, please call 203-946-7651 or 203-946-8582. Public comment testimony may also be submitted via email to publictestimony@newhavenctt.gov before 2:00 p.m. on the day of the meeting. This meeting may be viewed on the New Haven Board of Alders YouTube page. And I'd like to take this time to ask my colleagues, starting with my vice chair and going around the table clockwise, to introduce themselves, say their name, and what ward they represent.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Richard Furlow, Ward 27.
Good evening, Alder Adam Marchand, Ward 25.
Good evening, Evelyn Rodriguez, Alder of the 4th Ward. Good evening, Carmen Rodriguez, Alder of Ward 6.
Good evening, Eli Saban, Alder for Ward 7.
Good evening. I'm Ellen Kupo. I'm the Alder of Ward 8 and Chair of the committee. I want to just begin this evening framing. So tonight we have the opportunity to bring local zoning laws up to state statute to allow daycare centers as of right in all zoning districts across our city. We also have a chance to valuably assist the Fairmont Commission in creating opportunity for tenants and landlords to come together to resolve housing issues related to Fairmont practices. And tonight's workshop will focus on the current status of tenants unions in New Haven. And so, without further ado, we'll call up the makers of item 1 and item 2, OR-2024-0020 and OR-2024-0025.
Good evening, Alders.
May you please state your name, address for the record, and please begin your presentation.
Yes. So my name is Nate Hubrand. My address is 191 Worcester Street, New Haven, Connecticut. I am the Deputy Director of Zoning with the City Planning Department here in New Haven. So the first item for you tonight is, as you said, to allow, put it simply, to allow daycare uses by right in all zones throughout the city. This is in response to a recently enacted state statute, which is Public Act 23-142, which states that no zoning regulation shall treat any family child care home or group child care home located in a residence and licensed by the Office of Early Childhood pursuant to Chapter 368A in a manner different from single or multifamily dwellings. Zoning regulations shall not prohibit the operation in a residential zone of any family child care home or group child care home located in a residence or require any special zoning permit or special zoning exception for such operation. So to simplify that, they're basically saying that if single or multifamily residential use is permitted by right in a residential zone, then daycares need to be as well. So that means that the zones that are going to be affected by that are the RS1, RS2, RS3, and RM1. Those are the residential zones that are being affected by this. The remaining residential zones, which are RM2, RH1, RH2, and RO, are not listed here because what it says in the ordinance is that non-residential uses should be treated in the same manner as in the RM1 zones. So I don't know if they just did that of laziness or whatever, but yeah, so, you know, the RM1 changes will also affect the rest of the residential zones just by default.
Quickly, just want to call attention to my colleagues that we have a copy of the order before us tonight that was not in our packet.
Yes, thank you. So let's see. All right, so currently family daycare homes are actually permitted as of right in all the residential zones. However, the group and child daycare centers are not permitted within the RS1. So they'd go from not permitted at all to as of right. Group daycare homes are permitted by special exception in the RS2. That would change to as of right. Child daycare centers in the RS2 would go from not permitted to as of right. RS3 zones would go to as of right. Group daycare home and child daycare centers are permitted by special exception in the RM1 and RM2. Those again would go to as of right. Group and child daycare centers are not permitted in the RH1. Those would go to as of right. And then the RH2 and RO zones require a special exception for both group and child daycare centers. And again, those would be go to as of right. And then just, you know, I should have said this before. There are three different types of daycare centers that are defined in our zoning ordinance. So the first being a family daycare home. That means that they can't have any more than 6 children, and one of those children has to be the caretaker's own children. A group daycare home is between 7 and 12 children, and then a child daycare center is more than 12, so 13 and beyond. The residential zones have those distinctively listed within the zone for non-residential uses. However, the other zoning districts, the BC and the MU, have them all categorized just as one row in the use table. So instead of having to do them individually, it's just all of them are going to be, or we're proposing that all of them be as of right. Currently in the BC zone, oh, sorry. Okay, so in the BC zone, they currently require a special exception. That would go to as of right. The BC zone is the marine commercial, and the MU, which is the mixed use zone, currently allows daycares by special permit, and that would be changed to as of right. Those two zoning districts are very rare in terms of their capacity within the city. MU is the newly created zone we did along Long Wharf, and then the BC zone there's patches of it along the Quinnipiac River, but they're all adjacent to the water, and very far few between. There's not very many of the BC zones within the city, and like I said, MU is fairly new and just encapsulates the Long Wharf area. Let's see. So as I read in the state statute, the Public Act only really requires this to be done in residential zones. However, as I read, we're also going to be including or trying to include the BC and MU zones, which are business and industrial zones. The reasoning for this is because in the MU zone, the MU responsible growth plan encourages a lot of residential development. The city is encouraging residential development in the area, and based on a lot of discussions we've had with citizens in the city and some of the existing daycare programs, there's a real lack of daycares within the city altogether. So in areas where we're kind of encouraging a higher residential density, and we foresee there being a higher residential density, it makes sense to also make these, to remove some of the hurdles that go into the daycare uses as well.
Thank you, Deputy Director Grant. I just want to recognize and welcome our colleague from Ward 22. Has joined us. Thank you.
That was good times. That's all I have to say.
Excellent. I will say, as a parent of 2 young children, I can attest to the fact that we have a deep need for more quality early childhood care. And so when I saw this come across our desk, I was interested, and I'm happy that you're here. Thank you for presenting. Beyond bringing us up to the state statute, and I guess, is there any reason to do this beyond just encouraging this use throughout the city?
No, that's a good question. So, New Haven's a special act community, so we don't necessarily have to follow, what the state statute tells us to. We have the option of basically say we don't want to do that. However, like I said, there's a real lack of daycares, early childhood development programs in New Haven. So a lot of these are already permitted by special exception or special permit. Some of the residential zones, like I said, they're not permitted at all. But to be in line with what the state statute, it just makes sense from not only an economic standpoint, but from a development standpoint. If we're, like I said, encouraging higher density and increasing the housing stock throughout the city, it only makes sense to allow for daycares without as many hurdles as well. Another thing, sorry, I wanted to point out too, that just remind me, is that we are not proposing any new parking regulations for daycares. We currently already have a parking requirement for child daycare centers, which is, okay, so the current requirement for child daycare centers is that one passenger drop-off / pickup loading space is required for each 24 children or fraction thereof, and one off-street parking space for each 3 employees. So this is currently the parking standard as it's written, as it's in our ordinance today. We're not proposing any changes to that. It's just that, in areas where child daycare centers weren't allowed, that parking requirement just kind of follows suit into those zones.
Thank you. Are there any questions from members of the committee? Dr. Farrell?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, Deputy Director Hugh Grant. I'd like a little bit more explanation on if we don't pass this. It's the state statute. How can we not align with state statute as it pertains to zoning?
Yeah, so like I said, we're a special act community. So basically, we created our zoning regulations before it was required by the state. So there's, New Haven, Hartford, I believe Bridgeport, maybe there's a couple municipalities in the city that are special act communities, and basically the way that works is our zoning more or less supersedes state requirements. So, for example, if we have something, actually, it's a good example is the cannabis regulations. If the state tells you you have to do something, we have the choice whether to do it or not. And we can make it more strict than what the state requires. We can make it less restrictive. And the reason why I bring the cannabis as an example is they originally had the cap, based on the population. So I forget what the numbers was, like 1 per 25,000 people or something like that. And the state originally had that in their proposal, removed it, but us as a special act were able to put that back in our regulations. So if we were, say this were to not move forward, were to be denied, we wouldn't get necessarily penalized or anything by the state. It's just the Office of Policy Management and the OPM had reached out to us to see if we were in line with that regulation. As a result of those conversations and some of the trends that we've noticed with the lack of daycare, we felt that it was a good idea to follow suit. Oh, does that answer your question?
It's interesting. It's interesting. So could you explain how the as of right works? Does it mean that they don't have to come before BZA? Do they have to sit with your staff, city plan?
So by right means that, to your point, you don't need to get approval for the use by any board or commission. So like, a special exception requires BZA approval, a special permit requires city plan commission approval. By right means that the use itself doesn't require any board or commission approval. They would still have to go through the state licensing requirements, building permits if they need to do any sort of renovations to the structure or anything like that. And if it triggers site plan review, so if it's, a space that's 5,000 or more square feet, involves 10 or more parking spaces, then they still have to get site plan review. It just means that the use itself doesn't require any board or commission approval.
Okay, so that's what I was getting at. Thank you. So I'm wondering how it would get to your office, and I'm concerned about parking.
Okay.
And so since it's as of right, how would you be able to know how many children are at this facility and workers?
So like I said, there's a state licensing that they have to obtain, different department signatures, mine being one of them. So they have to come in, I wish I brought an example, but they basically come in with, it's a state license that says, the name, the address, the person operating the establishment, the type of daycare. So like I said, whether it's family, group, or child, that's how we know, the amount of children that are there. And then it requires separate sign-offs from zoning, and then, fire and building, I believe, are the three that they require sign-offs for the state license to be issued. So it would come through my office. We would review to make sure, that the use is allowed, which is by right, then it's permitted. We would make sure that the square footage is in line with, not needing site plan review. If they have, let's say they're required to have 3 parking spaces, but they don't have parking, then they would have to ask for, special exception from the Board of Zoning Appeals and have to go through that process. So they still have to meet all of, the requirements as far as parking, site plan review, things like that go. And then, and again, if they need a building permit, that also requires review from all the relevant departments, zoning, fire, building, I'm assuming ADA as well. So it would pass through our office at least once, possibly twice.
So your office, along with zoning, would be the 2 offices that would check for the parking. Check the size of the facility that's being used, and then decide whether or not that street has enough parking, or if they don't have a parking lot, then on-street parking would be the second option.
Well, so the parking requirements have to be off-street. They can't, anything that's on-street isn't considered towards their parking requirement necessarily, but, so for example, like a family daycare, if it's 6 or less children, there's currently no, as it stands right now, even there's no parking requirement for family daycares. We would still continue that to be no parking requirement. But to your point, if it's a congested area already, that wouldn't be something that's within zoning's purview necessarily, unfortunately. In that scenario, there's no parking requirements on this, or there's nothing we can do about that from a zoning perspective. Like TT&P might be able to issue something. I'm not sure. I don't want to answer for them and give you any sort of misleading information. But in that particular case, it wouldn't be a zoning, wouldn't be part of the zoning review process.
Okay, the only concern, reason why I'm just bringing this up is because we're having an increase in daycares, which we probably will, which is making it easier. There's one in my ward that now they want residential parking.
Oh, you mean like the permit pass things?
Yeah, because there's no parking and there's cars there, and where the cars belong most likely to the daycare. And so it's a small problem, but when you live on the street, a small problem becomes a major problem sometimes.
Yeah.
That's all I have, Matt. I just wanted to give a little bit of substance to why I'm going that direction.
If I could add too, like presumably the parking for daycares would be, drop off or pick up. So they wouldn't really be there for extended periods of time. However, that could be at, peak hours. So I understand your concern, if there's a bunch of people pulling out and pulling in at, 7:30, people are trying to go to work and vice versa. I understand that, but.
Unless you have 6 workers there.
Yeah.
Then that's 6 cars.
Right. Well, the employee parking would have to be on site, or they would have to go through the special exception process.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Any other questions? Alder Rodriguez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just going to follow up and piggyback off of my colleague, Alder Furlow. You've experienced, I know that there is, in my area, a daycare provider with 4 daycares on one street. So as of right, and the parking has become an issue. And I know it landed over in your department with respect to the concerns that the neighbors had regarding parking. So I think that is something that we definitely have to look at. We have a huge daycare, and then we have the same daycare provider in that area with 4 locations. So ensuring, you're saying as of right, they absolutely have to go through the state licensing. I don't, I can't tell you if that daycare provider has a relative in that daycare.
Understandable.
So these are potential concerns that residents may address with the alder in that ward. And I'm bringing that up because we had a similar case like that recently.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yes, exactly. So I think that is definitely a concern with, and I'm gonna finish up Madam Chair, with the parking and the drop off and the increase, with the concerns of the residents. So I just wanted to highlight that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Elder E. Rodriguez?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, thank you, Deputy Grant. My question stemmed around the application for the state licensing. Doug, I'm not sure if you can answer this question, but if you can, I think that's going to be helpful. Does the state licensing include, because the individuals who are taking care of these programs or facilities or businesses, being that we're taking care of children, does the application for state licensing include acknowledgement of city ordinances compliances where these businesses or daycare programs are? Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Do you mean like the general code of ordinances as far as like noise and things like that, or just the zoning regulations, or both?
The zoning regulations, both. In the sense, for example, I've seen applications, and usually they do have where you have to acknowledge that you know that you have to comply with these things.
Right.
In terms of the city ordinances, are they made aware so that they can meet the requirements of the city ordinances?
Yeah, so I mean, what they have to do is that they come in, for zoning, for example, into the office with the completed state license application. And then, there's a section, that's for the applicant, and another section that's for, this employee that's reviewing and signing off, respectively. And, so you basically would check a box saying that, I'm the zoning person reviewing for zoning. You check the box saying that, I'm reviewing the zoning ordinances, general code of ordinances. And then there's actually two boxes. You can give a pre-approval and then a final approval. So let's say, let's say that there's an issue with parking or something like that. I can check off, there's like a pre-approval, however, you need to do X, Y, and Z. Let's say you need to, apply for special exception for parking, or you need to find parking within 300 feet of, there could be things. So it's like, you meet some of them, but not others. Here's like we're giving you a pre-approval, but you have to come back with everything, once all that stuff's figured out in order to get a final approval. And then obviously the final approval means that they do meet all of those zoning regulations. The general code of ordinances, we do have a part, again, then that's currently in our ordinance that says that for daycares, all noise and other disturbing aspects of such usage shall be enclosed, screened, or otherwise controlled. That's already in our ordinance as far as it's right underneath the parking requirements. So it's to kind of acknowledge the fact that you need to be respectful to your neighbors, that like, I guess playground areas and things like that would need to be fenced in. They still have to make, and I'm sure the state also has their own review processes. You have to be in good standing with, police and things like that. But I can only speak to my review process. But yeah, they would have to meet all of those.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions from committee? Deputy Director Granberry, do take us through our second item.
I do have one more, Madam Chair, if I may.
Absolutely.
I just want to, thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to go back to the parking, because I'm just confused about this. So it says that, the ordinance says that there is one off-street parking space for each 3 employees.
Yeah. Right.
So all the parking is not off-street.
Well,
So I'm just wondering how this is gonna be monitored by your office.
So let's say, for example, someone comes in with, a daycare application. The state requires them to have a certain amount of number of employees per children. I don't know what that number is, to be honest with you, but let's say they have 4 employees. Based on that requirement of, 1 for every 3 employees, or a fraction thereof, they would need to have 2 off-street parking spaces. So we would require them to also provide us with a site plan showing where those 2 parking spaces are in order for us to sign off. So make it easier if they have 3 employees or 2 employees. Again, they have to bring in a site plan showing us that they have adequate parking on site. Or sometimes what they'll do is, let's say there's a parking lot nearby within 300 feet. They would have to provide us with a long-term lease agreement showing that, those spaces can be accessed through, that parking lot for the length of the use is active on the site. So that's part of our, review process. We require the applicant to demonstrate when they come in for sign off on their license application.
And in the case of residential parking, then that will be just off.
You know, like the permit one that you
Yeah,
brought
permit
up?
parking.
Yeah, so anything has to be off street, anything
Residential permit.
Yeah, anything within the right of way doesn't count towards their parking requirement. It has to be off street.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I would just like to welcome our colleague from the 27th ward, or the 26th ward who has joined us. Alden Parks. Alder Marchand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to make sure that we're all 100% clear on the parking, there's the parking requirement related to staff, and then there's the parking requirement related to parents and kids.
Yes.
Could you just please summarize for the committee what those are, so we can think about how they add up between the two? Thank you so much.
Yes, as you mentioned, there's a separate parking requirements for employees, which is 1 off-street parking space for each 3 employees. And for the number of children, the daycare center must provide 1 passenger drop-off / pickup loading space for each 24 children or a fraction thereof. So basically, 24 children or less requires 1 drop-off pickup space, and then 25 to 48 requires 2, etc.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions, Sam? All right, may we move to our second item? OR dash,
Vice Chair. OR-2024-0025.
Yeah, so this one isn't required by the state. I'm gonna throw that out there. So there's currently section 19. It's the custodial care facilities section. It's the last section under Article 3 in the residence districts. And all the way at the end of that section, they have these charts. And this should be in your materials as well. I just brought the actual ordinance with me. There should be some charts. The first of which is section 19, table 1, summary schedule of permitted uses in residence districts. So they have, every column is the different zones, and then the rows are the respective use categories. So they go down, the residential uses, single family, 2-family, rooming and boarding houses, trailer camps, and then it keeps going down. You have parking, government institutional buildings such as like playgrounds, fire stations, etc., medical and religious. If you keep going down, they have a daycare category, which again is split up by, it says family daycare, group daycare, and child daycare center. The reason why you're proposing to amend this table is number 1, the RS3 zone, which is the Townsend Estate that was enacted in the past year or 2. is missing from the table. So we'd be adding the RS3 column and then not making any changes to the RS3 other than the daycare uses that I just mentioned. There'd be no other changes. So, whatever's already allowed in that zone as far as the different use categories and the different rows would remain. There's no revisions to that with respect to the RS3 zone. Again, it's just adding that column to that table. And then the daycare aspects. The other table in here is section 19, table 2, which is summary of density, bulk, parking, and loading regulations, which again, it has the different minimum standards. So you get lot area per dwelling unit, the different setback requirements, building coverage standards, FAR, things like that, which is again missing the RS3. So we'd be adding the RS3 column, and then we would be revising this to incorporate changes that were made during the original ADU amendment, which was to lessen the lot area requirements for the RS1, RS2, RM1, and RM2. So they'd be going from, in the RS1, 7,500 square feet to 4,000, RS2, 7,500 to 4,000, RM1, 6,000 to 4,000, RM2, 5,400 to 4,000. And then we'd also be reflecting the change that was made for minimum lot width, which was, so in the RS1, RS2, they'd be changing from 60 feet to 50 feet. Again, those lot area and lot width requirements were already approved by the Board of Alders. They were just not, this table wasn't included in that submission. So we're effectively bringing this table, we're updating so it's accurately reflected to what the rest of the zoning ordinance says. Let's see. And then additionally, in table 2, it also has business and industrial districts, which we're proposing to just remove from this table entirely. The reason behind that being, number one, they're missing a lot of zones. So they're missing the BA1, the BA2, commercial gateway districts, the MU we just recently enacted, the TOC. There's missing a lot of zones. And number 2, because this is a table that's portraying information about residential districts within the residential district section of the ordinance, it should be solely about residential districts. There's already a place in the ordinance elsewhere where this information for business industrial districts can be found. There's no reason for it to be located here. So removing it because it's out of date and it doesn't belong as far as business industrial districts go, and then updating the residential districts to reflect existing conditions that were already approved. And finally, we would be moving both of these tables to a new section, which thankfully, this is located in section 19 now. Article 4 starts at section 21. So we don't have to renumber every section to one more than it already is. There is no section 20, so it's almost like it's meant to be. We're going to move these to section 20, which would be called section 20, summary of uses and bulk regulations for residential districts. Table 1 and 2 would still keep their same names. And the idea of this being, not only are we going to bring these up to date, but these are very useful tables, not only for staff, but for members of the public, potential developers. Instead of having to flip through every different thing, but all these different sections to find what you're looking for, this can be a very useful tool. in the fact that, we're trying to incorporate things that were already amended, but this table was left out, just shows how hard it is to find in the ordinance already. And so, hopefully moving forward, whenever any other changes are done to residential districts, this table will be incorporated and we'll have to do this again. Yeah. That's it.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions from committee? Alderman Shaw.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not so much a question, it's just a brief statement. As is indicated in our colleagues' packets, this and the previous item were heard by the City Planning Commission, and which voted to give these favorable recommendations. In this item in particular, what is being proposed here is actually some very important zoning housekeeping, if I may characterize it as such. And there's a mandate in the zoning code for the zoning commission to make periodic edits and corrections in order to produce greater clarity and to correct errors. This is part of the mandate of what we have as a zoning body to do from time to time, and this certainly does that. Already, our zoning ordinance is confusing for people to use, so making it simpler is a helpful thing, and I just want to make sure colleagues knew that the commission gave its full hearted support to this amendment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alderman Shaw. Are there any other questions from committee? All right, well, Deputy Director Grant, thank you for your presentation. And this time we're going to open it up to public comment on these two zoning ordinance amendments. And I wonder if there's anyone from the public who is here wishing to testify on either of these items. While Missy checks the signage, I'll just ask for a second time if there are any members of the public present wishing to testify on either of these zoning items. And for a third and final time, are there any members of the public present who would like to testify on these items? All right, well, seeing none, we will move to our third item of the meeting, and I'd like to welcome the Executive Director of the Fair Rent Commission, Dear Bermuda. Good evening.
Good evening, how are you?
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Once you're settled, if you please state your names and addresses for the record. Thank you.
I am Attorney Joseph Murley, Assistant Corporation Counsel, City of Haven.
Good evening, my name is Rosalise Fernandez. I'm the Executive Director for the Fair Rent Commission, City of Haven.
Thank you so much. As we finish just passing your paper, please feel free to begin your presentation.
So we are here before you this evening regarding the proposed amendments to the Fair Rent Commission ordinance. And we have provided you all with a side-by-side comparison for review, for easier review during this process. The reason why we wanted to make sure that we submitted a proposed ordinance amendment for your consideration is that we have been for some time in a state where the Fair Rent Commission is receiving a lot of more complaints. And as we receive more complaints, we wanted to make sure that we had a more robust system to answer the needs of the constituents that we serve. And there are various amendments that we're proposing. We can look at the specific sections from the beginning to the end before we can go through the top summary of the types of amendments that we're proposing.
Do you have a preference?
Okay. We'll start with the bigger picture items.
Thank you.
Okay. So these amendments come to really strengthen the work that the Fair Rent Commission is already doing. And at the top, the big picture is that we are reducing the threshold for the number of units to be considered if tenants are interested in forming tenants unions. So that original number used to be 10, we're reducing it to 5. One of the things that we're seeing is that in the city of New Haven, there are more tenants unions who are meeting and forming. And so it's a proposal for your consideration as a way to meet the needs of what the constituents have been approaching us with. And so, as you all remember, over 2 years ago, you all passed an ordinance amendment to allow the recognition of tenants unions. And so now we are asking for, as part of the recognition process, for us to lower that threshold number. So that's one of the bigger picture items. Another thing that we are requesting is that we add protections against retaliations. So the types of retaliations that we receive after a tenant files, the way that the ordinance currently reads, states clearly that if a tenant files a complaint with the Fair Rent Commission, because they file a complaint with the Fair Rent Commission, if they believe that they're being retaliated against, is that the problem? Okay, thank you. Let's check a bit closer. Thank you. If they believe that they're being retaliated against because they filed a complaint with the Fair Rent Commission, then they can file a retaliatory action complaint, which would then trigger our commissioners to be able to meet with the parties and to determine whether or not it is a retaliation. The types of retaliation complaints that we're receiving, the one that really stands out for the Fair Rent Commission time and time again has to do with, for example, if a tenant filed, because they filed a complaint with the Fair Rent Commission, now, for instance, their landlord might start an eviction process against them, which the commission has the ability to stop that from going through. And so within that scope of retaliation complaints, a type of complaint that we're receiving but haven't really been able to address thus far has been when a tenant files. Okay, that's what was this. Okay, thank you. When a tenant files a complaint with another city department that has to do with housing inspections, housing violations, whether it's with LCI, the health department, fire department, building. When the tenant files a case with them and has not filed a complaint with the Fair Rent Commission, because the tenant has opened an open case or has gone through the LCI process, et cetera, other departments, then they all of a sudden, for instance, receive a notice to quit. Or perhaps they might receive other types of retaliation. As it stands right now, the tenants could hypothetically go through housing court, but there is provisions in the state law to allow for the Fair Rent Commission to take those types of complaints. And so what we want to do is really solidify that language within our existing Fair Rent Commission ordinance to include that. Because time and time again, as staff, we're seeing a lot of those inquiries coming in where a tenant, for example, is in Section 8, they have gone through the LCI process because they live in unsafe, unhealthy housing conditions, and now they're being retaliated against. Now they all of a sudden receive a notice to quit. So that's one of the protections that we've added.
Excuse me.
Another one has to do with adding the language of residential licensing requirements. So as you all know, besides receiving the standard types of cases, which are excessive rental increases, we also receive sometimes combination of cases where it's the tenant files a complaint, yes, for excessive rental increase, but also for unsafe, unhealthy housing conditions. Or sometimes it could be a standalone unsafe, unhealthy housing condition. Simultaneously, they've also filed with LCI. And so in these cases, we have inserted this language, we would like for you all to consider that by inserting residential licensing requirements, that's also a criteria that we're looking at for unsafe, unhealthy housing conditions. You're probably wondering, well, what difference does that make? So let's use a hypothetical example. A tenant lives in a building that where the landlord has not actively pursued obtaining a residential licensing, which is a requirement. And they file, if this were passed, the tenant would then be able to file a complaint with the Fair Rent Commission for unsafe, unhealthy housing conditions. The complaint, hypothetically, once it goes through the entire process, we go to a public hearing. In that scenario, the tenant could potentially ask the commissioners for a rent reduction if there is no licensing on file. So it could be used as a mechanism to really encourage more landlords to quickly adhere to the law that is required by the city of New Haven. So that's another quick summary on one of the major points for the amendments. Another item that I wanted to point to your attention has to do with the land records. So when the commissioners make a ruling, let's use another example to contextualize this. If there is a case that goes before the commissioners where perhaps it's a very egregious, unsafe, unhealthy housing conditions, and for instance, let's say the commissioners rule to reduce a tenant's rent to half. When it goes to half, or whatever the amount is of the reduction, and all of a sudden, the existing owner decides to sell the property, all of a sudden we have a new owner who comes in. The new owner has absolutely no idea that there's such a ruling, nor would they have been alerted in reference to the actual ruling before they were deciding on whether or not they were going to make this purchase. And so we've had cases where, and on our part, on behalf of the Fair Rent Commission staff, as soon as, if there's a ruling on file for unsafe, unhealthy housing conditions that's still open, and then all of a sudden the existing owner sells the property without having made those repairs, we automatically, once there's a new landlord, we do reach out to the landlord. We do guide them with the information of the ruling. The new landlord has a very valuable point, which is, how did I not know before actually purchasing this property? And so had they known, then they could calculate as part of their pro forma and really be proactive in knowing what kind of investment are they getting themselves into? How much money do they have to sink beforehand? We've had cases where it's not just one unit that received a rental reduction, it's several units. And so all of a sudden you have this new landlord who had no idea, and there's a rent reduction. They're not able to collect the original amount. And on top of that, they have to make pretty significant repairs to the building. So if we provide it on land records, it will be very helpful to the landlords so that there's no surprises. Another important item as part of these amendments is the section that has to do with inspections, 3 attempts of inspection. So In the cases where there's unsafe, unhealthy housing conditions, and again, sometimes it's a mix between a rental increase and unsafe, unhealthy housing conditions, we never have a problem receiving information from the tenant regarding them being accessible to allowing for an inspection to occur, whether that's by LCI or any other governing city department. But we've noticed some cases where after there has been a ruling and the amount of the ruling has been to reduce what the tenant pays, then it might be a bit difficult to get back into the unit. So we just want to make sure that we have the accessibility to be able to get into the unit and to have at least 3 attempts of an inspection, absent good cause, so that we're able to then figure out, have the repairs been made. Those are the main categories, but now I want to go into the other sections as well. And for that, I will go by the side-by-side sheet that we've provided you with. So for the first item, it's just, you're going to see a lot of corrections that have to do with either outdated language or language corrections that should have been made some time ago. And that first one is just adding the word "or" to include other legal ways of being a tenant. That's section 12 3/4-2. The second item on the side-by-side sheet has to do with the number of units that can unionize, which we've covered. Again, we're lowering that threshold from 10 to 5. We've already covered adding the licensing requirements as part of our language. The other item is we have outdated language regarding gender. So we've replaced it with gender neutral pronouns. So instead of aldermen, board of alders, instead of chairman, chair, etc. The other item that we've included is request for recording of testimony. We've eliminated that only because pursuant FOIA, we have to include that anyway as part of our website, which is now being done. We've gone through the item that has to do with the land records and filing the rulings on the land records. Another item here has to do with updating the tenant union membership roster. So what we've noticed from the moment that you all approved for us to be able to recognize tenants unions, we now have 7 recognized tenants unions in the city of New Haven. And of those 7, only 2 have consistently provided us with updated rosters. And it's really important for us to have that, especially if, for instance, tenants unions are reporting that they're receiving retaliation. So we need that information to be updated. And as part of the amendment, we would like you all to consider for that to be amended. There's an amendment to the amendment, but to consider having it provided to us on a yearly basis. Another item that we explained is the retaliatory eviction action. So we're just changing the language on the ordinance so it could be more inclusive, so it's not just an eviction, so we're changing that title. And another thing that we added on here is other forms of retaliation. So this one is very specific language. So there have been moments where we receive a complaint, a case that's filed by a tenant, and then all of a sudden, because the tenant filed, their rent is going up to a proposed excessive amount, what they believe is excessive. And because they filed the complaint and they've already received the actual new lease, a lease renewal, and now they filed, and all of a sudden the landlord says, you know what, I'm not going to renew your lease anymore. So this specific language would address that part. If a landlord offers a tenant a lease and then revokes the offer of a new lease, then that shall be considered a retaliation. If we go to the second page of the side-by-side, we went through a little earlier, including other departments, so LCI, if the tenant goes to health, building, fire, etc. If because they open a case with those departments and all of a sudden the tenant believes they're being retaliated against, we would be able to take those cases of retaliation. We already discussed the 3 attempts of reinspection. Regarding the retaliatory claim, we've had instances where tenants in the existing ordinance, the way that it's written, every single retaliatory claim must be seen by the commissioners at a public hearing. And so we added this language so that as staff, we could internally investigate the nature of the retaliatory claim. There have been moments where the retaliatory claim is actually really a civil dispute. And they're coming through the Fair Rent Commission to solve something that doesn't fit the retaliation criteria. So adding that language would clean that process up for us. The other item on here has to do with taking out the 15-day limit. So when we look at the ordinance as it reads right now, there is a section which is 12.75-11A, and then there's a section of 12.75, subsection 5. And so both of those sections have to do with how long do we have before, from the moment that a tenant files a retaliation complaint to the moment that we then have to meet and hold a retaliation hearing. And we want to make sure that the language is clear and it's in conformity, because in one section it says we are going to give ourselves 30 days before we have a retaliation hearing from the date that we receive the retaliation complaint. And then in another section, it says that it's only 15 days. Realistically, we've been operating with the 30 days because we have to provide due process and due notice for both parties. So we would like for that consideration as well. The next part has to do with outdated language. There was a reference in there regarding to the County of Common Pleas of New Haven. That should be removed to Superior Court. And the last item that we have for an amendment is the tenant responsibility for rent. This section, there's an amendment to that amendment in your packets. And we just want to make sure that there's clarity that there's no room for doubt, for any doubt, that the tenant is responsible for the last agreed upon rent to the landlord, unless of course if there's proof that the tenant should pay a different amount if there was a different decision by a different government authority. We removed in the amendment to the amendment the part that has to do with the 6 months provision. And the reason for that is we want to make sure, we don't want to get into a screening of what is considered 6 months. Is it from the time that the complaint is filed? Would it be, for example, we don't want anything to be misconstrued. If the tenant is a little late on their rental payment, then would that or not be considered the full amount? We've removed that part so that there's no confusion, and just to clearly say, look, all we're saying is when you file a complaint, just make sure that you're up to date with your rent and that you understand that it is your responsibility to pay the last agreed upon amount. The reason why we've inserted that in there is that we've had cases that come before the commission at the public hearing level where we are under the assumption that the tenant has been paying, and then all of a sudden we find out that the tenant has made 0 payments towards their rent from the moment that they began the Fair Rent Commission process. That does not happen often. It's very rare, but it has happened, and so we just want to make sure that we provide clarity on that. In your packets, we've also included information regarding the amount of cases that we've received for retaliations. So looking back at 2024, there were 17% of our cases that were retaliatory cases. And we wanted to highlight that for you, seeing as we are now proposing an amendment so that we can allow for more types of retaliation complaints to be seen by the Fair Rent Commission process. Then if we look at for 2025, we've broken down the number of cases and the types of the specific retaliation complaints that we've received, which are 14% of the cases so far. In the next page after that, you'll find a section that has to do with tenants unions, right at the top. So when you all approved as alders the amendment so that the Fair Rent Commission could recognize tenants unions, this was in 2022, we received 1 tenant union who wanted to be recognized, and they registered with the Fair Rent Commission. In 2023, we received 3. And so far this year, we received 3. So we've had a total of 7. The addresses are listed below: 530 Eastern Street, 1279 Quinnipiac, 1455 State Street, 1476 Chapel, 311 Blake Street, 284 Orange Street, 195, 199 Lenox Street. Of those 7, 6, I repeat, 6 of those tenants unions, their landlords are Ocean. 1 is the Emerson LLC. Below that slide, we provided the number of tenant union members, the biggest actually being Blake Street Tenants Union at 31. We've registered a total of 130 tenant union members to date. In the next slide, the retaliation complaints. We received in 2023 17. This is specifically for tenants unions. And in 2024, we received 9. The types of retaliation complaints that we're receiving from the tenants unions can range between increases, excessive increases. We've had cases before where it's 30% or more, notices to quit, non-renewal of leases. People ask us, well, what can occur when tenants unions formed? One example that we have on file is Blake Street Tenants Union. They were able to go through a collective bargaining agreement, and they were able to successfully enter into a memorandum of agreement with Ocean. And then that is it for me for now.
I really have nothing to add. Director Bermudez's presentation, very thorough, very detailed. I'm really here to help answer any legal questions that may arise.
Thank you, Director Bermudez, for a very thorough walkthrough of all of that. I will ask if there are any members of committee questions.
I do, Madam Chair, but I'm gonna just wait just a moment.
Sure.
Taking it through.
I see, Alder Rodriguez.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just going to ask one question at this time. And my question stems around the tenants. If the tenants go through a fire inspection or whatever, is there a requirement, is anywhere, indicating that they must engage with Fair Rent Commission? And if they do not, for example, the fire department or Livable Cities Initiative make a referral to Fair Rent Commission? Thank you.
So if there is a fire that occurs in the unit or the building where a tenant lives, there currently is no requirement for them to file a complaint with the Fair Rent Commission. It is really up to the tenant to decide whether or not they want to do that. But we do receive referrals from LCI and from other departments, LCI being at the top.
Madam Chair, is the follow-up?
Yes.
Thank you. So a tenant may not go to Fair Rent Commission. However, if one of our departments makes a referral, it is implied that the tenant will pursue the supports of Fair Rent Commission?
Yes.
Thank you.
So if a tenant receives a referral from LCI, we actually always, that's one of the questions that we ask in the complaint, and as well as before we get to a complaint in the inquiry process, we ask, how did you hear about us? And that allows us to figure out if it's a referral from LCI. If it is a referral from LCI, we'll say, oh, LCI. Or if it's from health or whichever other department. And then after that, through the inquiry process, then we're able to ask the questions, gauge whether or not they're able to submit a complaint if they would like to.
Thank you. Related to
One last question, yes.
Thank you. In reference to the landlords that retaliate, are they retaliating because Fair Rent Commission got involved? Or because the individual, the tenant reached, through the fire inspection, Fair Rent Commission got involved?
Okay. So the question is, in the cases that we're seeing of retaliations, are the landlords retaliating if once it's determined by the commissioners that there is a retaliation? Are we looking back and then saying, are the landlords retaliating because the tenant filed a Fair Rent Commission? Or are we seeing in our inquiries that because a tenant received a referral or went to LCI, then they're getting retaliated that way? Is that correct?
By Fair Rent Commission getting involved?
Yeah. So we're seeing both. We're seeing both. When the commissioners determine that there is a retaliation, and again, it has to be taken by a vote of the commissioners to make that determination. We as staff don't say, oh, yes, without a doubt, this is a retaliation. That's not our role. If it's determined by the commissioners that there is a retaliation, in many cases where they've made that determination, it has occurred. You could see it, the timeline, very easily. It occurs after the tenant files a complaint. So they file a complaint on this date of October, and then the 1st of October, and then on October 26th, on October 15th, after filing the complaint, there's a retaliation. We're seeing that play out chronologically.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I just want to direct the committee to, we received 2 letters of support for these ordinance amendments. One from Sarah Mervine from the Center for Children's Advocacy, and one from Commissioner Roberts for 651 Quinnipiac Avenue. Dr. Philip.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Director Bermudez, for the presentation. Councilor, welcome. Just want to get a better understanding of section 1234-10C. We know we have some bad actors, don't we? Who are leasing apartments. And we also know that we have some bad renters. I just want to get a better understanding of how, essentially, she says, it shall be retaliatory action. It shall be retaliatory action, okay, for a landlord to revoke an offer to renew a tenant's lease. I understand that part, to bring an action or proceeding against the tenant to recover possession of the dwelling unit. And here's where my question is, to demand an increase in rent from the tenant. Now, I understand decrease the services, that's unacceptable, right? But, so say that there's an issue, and then the following lease, the year is over, and then the rent goes up. That will be considered retaliatory? Because, I mean, I don't know, when can the landlord increase the rent then?
Yes, so the commissioners have the authority when they rule, if they decide to, whatever their ruling is, whether it's to increase the tenant's rent to the amount that the landlord is indicating, or whether it's to stagger the rental increase over a period of time, or if it's a rent reduction, whatever their ruling is, the commissioners have the ability, their ruling will last for up to a year. And so that's what is included in our ordinance. That's the way that we have done it. We hear that some other municipalities don't have the 1-year provision, but every ordinance is a bit different. So to answer your question, it is a year ruling. And after that, I'll defer here to our co-counsel because we've been asked the question of, does the commission have the authority to then indicate to or force the landlord to enter into a new lease? I think that's the question you're asking.
Okay, I'll take that question too.
Okay.
Same time, Madam Chair.
The answer is that there is no way the Fair Rent Commission, there's nothing in the jurisdiction of the Fair Rent Commission that empowers it to force the parties into a new lease. And we have found out through recent history that it is simply cannot be done. So, we did have a situation where, for various reasons, the Fair Rent Commission did issue such an order, which we have now very recently vacated, knowing that it's illegal and they overstepped their bounds. Getting back to your original question, Alder Furlow, subsection C, I'd like to add that you might have a situation where you have a tenant who is on a month-to-month without a yearly lease. They file a complaint with LCI, Fair Rent, whomever, and as a result of that, instead of having a normal month-to-month rental agreement, suddenly the landlord says, I'm going to jack you up $300 a month now because you're a troublemaker. And there's no lease that says, this is your rent for 12 months. They're just going month to month. The Fair Rent Commission has to find, as a matter of fact, after a hearing, that rental increase in that example was as a result of, because of the complaint being made. A landlord does, of course, have a right under most circumstances to raise the rent, but if it's done because cause and effect, complaint was made, now you have the prima facie case for retaliation.
How did you catch that?
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, should be speaking to the microphone. How would you catch that?
Catch what exactly? I'm sorry.
Catch the retaliatory action of a rent being raised?
It's really based on all the circumstances. The commissioners sit as a jury, really, judge and jury, and they hear from the tenant, they hear from the landlord. Many times the landlord has a perfectly good explanation as to why the rent has to be raised, and the tenant just doesn't quite get it or can't afford it or simply would prefer not to. And many times the commission finds that there is no retaliation. But I think it's really a preponderance of the evidence based on all the circumstances. And the timeline is always crucial. A complaint was made, again, let's say on a month-to-month tenancy, a complaint was made by that tenant, and 2 to 3 weeks later, a significant increase is made, and with no real justification. It's not like, in that case, let's say that the landlord can't point to an increase in utilities or insurance or mortgage or operating costs or anything like that. They just sort of did it. In a situation like that, I think all the circumstances tend to preponderate in favor of a finding of retaliation.
How about repairs? Would that be
That's a-
non-retaliatory if
That's,
the tenant?
that would certainly be one of the considerations the commission would consider, certainly. That's one of the factors, because the landlord is asked to justify it. And sometimes you see landlords come in and say, well, this happened, I recently had to replace the boiler, it cost X number of thousands of dollars, and that has to be spread around. And another indicator would be if the landlord had raised several tenants, or maybe all tenants, and not just this one. That might be a strong indicator that this is a legitimate need for a rental increase.
What would you consider a valid percentage of an increase of rent?
It's really hard to say, and we get asked this question a lot, but it really depends on a case-by-case basis. Because perhaps you might have two individuals who seemingly do make the same income. However, one of them might be elderly and disabled, and so all of a sudden that places them into a protected class. You might have individuals who are in a position where they're on a fixed income. And there's different criteria that's taken into consideration. So if you have, for instance, even within the same building, if you have two tenants who live in the same building, they might be paying slightly different amounts. One of them is on a fixed income, one of them has unsafe, unhealthy housing conditions. The one that has, and these are hypotheticals, the one that has unsafe, unhealthy housing condition, it's very egregious what's going on within their unit, to the point where the ceiling is practically almost going to collapse on them, right, in one of their bedrooms where their children sleep. And that's why these criteria, it includes things like the commissioners being able to review if there are unsafe, unhealthy housing conditions, when LCI, the health department, whoever else has been involved in investigating and seeing whether or not there's housing code violations. That's a specific criteria that's taken into consideration. And that would be rated a bit more than in a scenario where it's absent of that. There are no unsafe, unhealthy housing conditions, even though they live in the same building. And so it really does depend on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, one more, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Thank you. I am concerned about dropping down from 10 to 5. And I'm wondering how many apartments we have, and you may not have this, if not, I'll ask this mention to the chair. How many apartments do we have in the city that consist of 5 that may be considered the need to fall under this category?
Yeah, that's a great question, Dr. Furlow. So right now, the provision that we have is for 10 units. And so we're talking about 19,191 total units. By lowering the threshold to the 5 units and up, we're adding an additional 5,293 units. These are the numbers that we received directly from the assessor's office. Then you ask yourself, well, 5 units, right? So it's a 5-unit building. So you're talking about a property that is worth, and on average, $500,000. Then you have to ask yourself, of those who would be placed in that bracket of 5 units or more who are landlords, how many are LLCs? Our understanding is that the majority are LLCs. And we can get further clarity from the assessor's office on that. And so it is different than, let's say, a 3-family. In a 3-family, you do have a lot of scenarios where it's mom and pop. And by that, I mean, you have the owner who lives in one of the units. 5 units sets it apart from that.
Thank you, that's very helpful. Through you, Madam Chair, I'd like to request, how many of the 5 units are owner occupied? And what that specific number is for the LLCs? And we did pat, okay, I'll say the rest of the session. Great. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions for the committee? Alder Seaton?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a question, I think about the same section that my colleague was just asking about. It's on page 7 of, and also page 70 of our packet. It says the commission may administratively dismiss any complaint by tenant who fails to comply with 3 attempts to permit inspections by relevant municipal departments. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about why you felt the need to add that section.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Thank you.
When a tenant comes to us and they have a scenario where they have unsafe, unhealthy housing conditions in their unit, on average, the tenant, I should say all the time, pretty much all the time, I've never seen a scenario where the tenant has unsafe, unhealthy housing conditions and they're refusing entry. They're very willing to show us, look, I'm living with this problem. I've been living with this problem for 6 months, a year, 2 years, however long. And so in some cases, they've had other departments go in, they've had LCI go in, and LCI tends to be the department or our go-to for referrals when there are unsafe and unhealthy housing conditions. So it's not a problem at the onset of the complaint. It's not that the problem exists in the beginning of the complaint or in the middle of the complaint. So from the moment that they file and there's unsafe, unhealthy housing conditions, somebody from the city goes out and inspects the unit. Somebody confirms, yes, undoubtedly, you have had this problem for some time. And now it becomes city record. Fast forward. In some cases, we are seeing that after the commissioners rule, and let's say, for instance, there has been a reduction in the rent, a significant reduction to $1 to $2, just using that as an example, then it gets more challenging. It becomes more challenging for, let's say, an LCI inspector to go back into the unit and re-inspect. And so what we're saying is it would be helpful if we had a criteria to say, look, let's attempt to go into your unit and re-inspect to see if there have been any updates, right? Or in scenarios where the landlord is claiming, I've made all the repairs. Why is the case still open? Why is the reduction still to $1? I've made these repairs. LCI is attempting to go back in to re-inspect the unit, but they cannot. And so, it's with that in mind to make sure that we have the ability to be able to go back into the unit to make the necessary repairs, but that the tenant is a willing partner, the same way that they're a willing partner from the beginning. Allow us to also have access to your unit and be a willing partner towards the end so that we can reach a resolution to the problem.
That's very helpful. Thank you for explaining that. Just to quickly follow up. So if the commission were to administratively dismiss a complaint after a tenant fails to comply with 3 attempts to permit inspections, when they dismiss that complaint, that means that the rent reduction or any other order by the Fair Rent Commission, that would be terminated at that point when the complaint is dismissed?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And that would be absent good cause. So let's say the tenant is sick and they're not able to show their apartment, or perhaps they were out of the country. That's understandable, and that's reasonable to us.
Great. Thanks so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Alder Marchand?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for bringing this forward to us and for your hard work on behalf of our residents. Just just 3 questions around some details. I see that you're proposing that the tenant union update membership every year instead of every 6 months. Could you just say a little bit more? Was that too burdensome? Did you find there was not enough turnover to warrant that frequency of update?
Yeah, we found that from the feedback, it would be difficult to gather that information for folks who are members of tenants unions, in that because there are different tenants who are moving in at different periods of time, it would make more sense to receive that on a yearly basis. And so as of right now, the 7 tenant unions that have registered with the Fair Rent Commission, I'll read through the list of who has updated their memberships. So 530 Eastern Street, they registered recently, August of 2024. 1279 Quinnipiac Ave, they registered in 2023, and they provided us with an updated roster on this August of 2024. 1455 State Street registered May 2024. 1476 Chapel Street registered June 2024, but we have not received an updated roster, even though we made the request. 311 Blake Street registered on November 2022. They updated their roster May 2023, but we haven't received an updated roster for 2024. Emerson, they were recognized in February of 2024, and then the last one, 195, 199 Lenox Street, registered November 2023. So if we're looking back in time, we have not continuously, we need to receive their membership rolls if they would like us to continue to recognize them. And so that's why it's important.
Thank you for that response. My next question is in regards to section 12 3/4-10C. And this is in regards to the 6 months after the filing of such complaint or having an open order. And that strikes me as having the effect of lengthening the duration of time when an action could be considered retaliatory. But I'm not sure I'm understanding that correctly. So I would just like you to explain it a little bit.
The reason why we included that sentence, that wording, or having an open order, is sometimes a tenant will file a case, will open a case with LCI, and it might take more than 6 months from the moment of a first inspection to then a re-inspection and to figure out what's going to happen with the case. And so we want to make sure that we include a provision in there that indicates it's not just if you file a case with an LCI for 6 months, but also if you filed from the date that you filed from LCI or health or fire or the other ones, if there's still an open order, because what we've seen is that sometimes the open order, when LCI sends a report to the landlord and says, this is the list of violations, housing code violations that you have to fix by X amount of time. X amount of time goes, it passes, it concludes, and the tenant is still faced with the same problem. And now you have a tenant who has the same problem after 6 months. 8 months have passed, 9 months have passed, a year has passed, and they still have the same problem. And so if that tenant still has the same problem and they have an open case with LCI and those housing code violations have not been fixed yet, and now all of a sudden the landlord wants to retaliate against them and provide them with a notice to quit, that's what it's addressing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's helpful. I'm just a bit of a grammar nerd, so I'm wanting to make sure I understand it. Well, it says within 6 months after the filing of such complaint, which that makes sense to me. There's a date when a complaint is filed, you can count 6 months out from that. Is it within 6 months of having an open order, or is it there's still an open order? I'm just not understanding what it means.
It's still an open order. There's
So it's
still-
not 6 months after the order was closed, it's like the order is still open.
Yeah, because we've seen cases where the LCI order will prevail for a year and a half,
Mhm.
et cetera. Even though technically there are limits that the landlord has to comply with. The maximum amount of time in many of these violations are 21 days. 21 days, that goes really fast. And yet the repairs are still not completed. There's still an open case with LCI.
So it shall be a retaliatory action for a landlord to do these things, list, if there's an open order still, regardless of when that order was first made.
Correct.
And did I take it correct when you said, I concluded from what you said earlier, that a city agency providing a report to a landlord of open items could be an event that triggers a retaliatory action?
Yes.
Is that, okay. So this substantially increases the scope of time when an action could be considered retaliatory.
Correct.
Thank you. My last question regards the licensing requirement, having that as something to be considered as part of an unsafe, unhealthy housing. I guess I'm just trying to understand better. Is the amendment attempting to make that a factor the commission could consider? Or is it automatically evidence of an unsafe, unhealthy condition?
It would be a factor for the commissioners to consider as unsafe, unhealthy housing condition.
It by itself, it wouldn't necessarily trigger a ruling by the commission that that landlord is at fault and should be sanctioned or something.
The commissioners would still have to vote on how they want to approach it.
Mhm.
Hypothetically, I use the example of if a tenant files because their landlord does not have a landlord license for the building or for the unit, then the tenant can file, if this passes, the tenant would be able to file a complaint because of unsafe, unhealthy housing conditions. If we were to go in front of the commissioners, they can make the argument, I want my rent reduced because I live in an unsafe, unhealthy housing condition. There's no standing, landlord licensing on the books. And so now I'm unsafe. I don't want to live in a building that goes up in flames. And all of a sudden we have a death. Could they make that argument? Would the tenant be able to make the argument? If this passes, they would be able to hypothetically make an argument like that.
What's the consequence now for a landlord not to participate in the residential licensing program?
It's fine.
It's a fine.
My understanding is that the fine was increased to
Yeah.
$2,000.
Right. That's my understanding too. So could I may be using the wrong legal terminology here, but could this be seen as like double jeopardy for landlords, that they subject to a fine for not participating in this program, but they also could be punished in this other way for not participating in this program? Would that somehow be a problem legally for us to do that? Multiple punishments for
Right,
For
right,
doing
I see
it.
what you mean. I really don't think there's any prohibition on having a double punishment, so to speak. You know, one is the city levying a fine, the other is the Fair Rent Commission reducing a rent. And I think that's perfectly within the purview of the Fair Rent Commission. I really don't see an issue there. Yeah, I think that's fine. I don't see a problem there.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
If I could, sorry, if I could just revisit something Alder Marson brought up. You know,
Yes, please.
you have to also remember that if there is a licensing problem with a landlord and the tenant makes a complaint, you know, I'm living in an unlicensed apartment, that isn't in fact like a strict liability or you know, a per se
violation of the ordinance. In other words, the alders, the commission would have the right to hear it in its context and say, well, it's true, you don't have a license, but we're not gonna just decrease in rent simply on that fact alone. What is the actual real life result of you not having a license? Is their standard of living lower, things like that. So it's not just a per se violation of you don't have a license, your rent's getting lower, that's it. So again, they would look at the totality of the circumstances. Thank you.
Any other questions for Pig? Alder Rodriguez, let me just see if anyone else wants to spoken. Alder Rodriguez?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I have a little concern, and my concern has to do with, again, going back to the recommendation or referral. A tenant finds themselves now unhoused because of the intervention, and they blame Fair Rent Commission. But the referral or the recommendation came from one of our departments. Is there any retaliation on the part of the tenant to the city due to the retaliation that the landlord has taken, where then they may find themselves unhoused at the end of the day? Thank you, Madam Chair.
As it stands right now, the ordinance that we have on the books does not allow explicitly, for instance, for us to take a complaint from a tenant when they've gone to LCI. I'm using this as an example. And they receive a notice to quit, and then they come to us. And they say, I have a notice to quit, can you help me? I want to file a complaint because I have a notice to quit. Why did you have a notice to quit? Because I went to LCI. The way that the ordinance reads, if a tenant were to receive a notice to quit and they believe, right, they believe that it was because they went to LCI and now their landlord is retaliating against them, we cannot take a retaliation complaint in that order. They would have to go to housing court. So the amendment that we're proposing would assist with that so that we can take those types of retaliation complaints to be seen before the commission.
I just want us to be careful in reference to ramification because of the interventions. Yeah, so, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any further questions? Thank you so much, both of you, for your presentation. I'm going to open it up to public comment.
You're welcome. And this was something that our fellow Bridget, if you just stand. Bridget Tsao produced this for us. She's our Yale Urban Fellow. It's just the impacts of looking at specific 88 cases in the Fair Rent Commission for you to read.
Thank you.
If you'd like.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we have 7 people signed up. So, I'm sorry, 5 people signed up to give public comment, and I'll go down this list, and if you have not yet signed up, there will be an opportunity for you to speak. I'm going to ask that my vice chair keep time. Everyone 3 minutes to testify, and I'm going to start with Peter Fusek from the Connecticut Tenants Union. If you please state your name and address for the record, and then you have 3 minutes to testify.
Absolutely. My name is Peter Kosak. I'm a New Haven resident living at 169 Alden Avenue, and I'm here to testify in support of the proposed amendments to Chapter 12 3/4 on behalf of the Connecticut Tenants Union. With acknowledgement that Executive Director Will believes Bermudez is a very hard act to follow. New Haven took a very significant step in the fall of 2022 by becoming the first municipality in our state to formally recognize tenant unions, providing a route of recourse for tenants facing shared issues and organizing with their neighbors to see those issues addressed. Our city has remained a steadfast partner in the effort to empower residents in the face of the ongoing housing crisis. The exceptional work of the Fair Rent Commission under the leadership of Executive Director Bermudez and the updated structure and increased efficacy of LCI have demonstrated that New Haven takes the concerns of its residents seriously, as well as the advice and advocacy of its renters who have successfully self-organized with their neighbors to seek out effective solutions to this crisis. As indicated by that collaborative process between the city and the tenant unions that residents here have formed, this work remains ongoing as we continue to innovate and collaborate in search of housing justice, community cultivation, and economic equity and opportunity. The proposed amendments in question represent an important next step in that effort. The recognition of tenants unions in buildings of 5 or more units will allow thousands of additional tenants across over 5,000 units, as Executive Director Bermudez mentioned, to receive the legal backing they need to form tenant unions in their buildings without fear of retaliation, and to raise complaints about collective issues in a collective manner. This will empower countless more residents to raise concerns about deferred maintenance or unjust rent, bolstering the affordability, safety, and sustainability of our city's housing stock. The additional amendments, which expand the FRC's anti-retaliatory powers and ability to acknowledge the residential licensing program, while also enhancing the clarity, efficacy, and efficiency of the Commission's complaint filing process, as well as its follow-up and reporting processes, will further strengthen New Haven's Fair Rent Commission ordinance and help garner the trust of those who use it. I hope that the Board of Alders will pass this amendment and make a significant next step in the effort to ensure the safe, equitable, and dignified housing that our residents deserve. New Haven is a union town and a city of renters, so I think it makes sense that we continue to set the standard for statewide tenant protections and union recognition. Thanks for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Peter. Are there any questions for Peter? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next on our list is Brigitte Tao. Good evening. Please state your name and address for the record. I know 3 minutes to testify.
Okay. Good evening, Alders. My name is Bridget Tao. I'm going to be reading testimony that was written and submitted by Brittany Hunt.
Can we have an address?
From anyone.
Yeah.
Oh,
You can do yours, yeah.
okay. My address is 2641 Kempston Drive, Woodbury, Minnesota.
Thank you.
Quote, "Good evening, esteemed Board of Alders. My name is Brittany Hunt. I used to reside at 189 Wooster Street until July 2024. I'm writing this tonight to support the amendments to the ordinance for the Fair Rent Commission, Chapter 12 and 3/4. I believe the proposed amendments will help with more protections, strengthen the ability of tenants to unionize, and build up New Haven's housing code enforcement process. As a former New Haven tenant, I went through the Fair Rent Commission process starting in November 2023, seeking help from the Fair Rent Commission to rectify unsafe and illegal conditions in my apartment. Upon moving into our apartment, the problems started almost immediately and were unlike anything I have ever experienced in my 15+ years as a renter. Within the first month, a leak started from the ceiling above my bathroom. I contacted our landlord immediately and frequently asked for a repair, but he never fixed the problem. We lived 8 months with a ceiling that had broken open and leaked water on our toilet anytime the apartment above us used their bathroom. Additionally, in October 2023, our heat went out 5+ times for multiple days each time. This was extremely stressful as I had a 1-year-old son in the home with me, and a landlord that was not motivated to address the issue. It wasn't until I got Fair Rent involved that anything changed. Once the Fair Rent Commission was involved, my landlord finally fixed the heat, fixed the leak, and repaired the ceiling in my bathroom, and addressed a number of other minor issues which I had reported many months ago. The commission was able to hold my landlord accountable for doing these critical repairs, and they ultimately reduced my rent 25% for the 4 months between when I submitted my case and when it was heard by the commissioners. My family's living conditions were made safe, thanks to the work of the Fair Rent Commission. That's why I stand here in support of the Fair Rent Commission and the proposed changes to the ordinance that would strengthen the commission's work. The changes would allow the commission to help more people by expanding the types of retaliations the commission can receive, increase the number of tenants unions, and include cases of non-compliance of residential licensing to be received as part of unsafe, unhealthy housing conditions. In my case, lowering the number of units required to unionize would have offered me the opportunity to potentially help my neighbors as well. Each of them had their own issues with getting repairs done. Additionally, the expanded definition of retaliation would have been helpful in my case, as my landlord told me many times that he would not renew my lease because I filed a case with the Fair Rent Commission. In conclusion, I strongly urge you to vote yes and approve the proposed amendments to the Fair Rent Commission. Thank you for your time. End quote.
Thank you so much for reading that. Could you just one more time, just repeat the address? I apologize, of the individual whose testimony you've provided.
Yeah, that was 189 Wooster Street.
Thank you. Are there any questions from committee? Thank you for your testimony. Next, we're going to call up Gary Monk. Good evening.
Good evening.
If you please state your name and address for the record, and you have 3 minutes to testify.
Okay. My name is Gary Monk. My address is 140 Fountain Terrace. So I'm currently a commissioner. I have been for a couple terms, right? So I have it that the verbiage, the language, the changes, the edits is relevant to moving forward. I'm speaking for the commission board, we need these tools so that we can adequately be fair to the landlord as well as to the tenants. It's not about one-sidedness at all. It really is just bringing things up to date. As I'm just picking up gender, for example, it's relevant today. 10 years ago, maybe not, but right now it is. So it's imperative that we bring our ordinances up to date. I felt Alderwoman Rodriguez, in terms of evictions, I have it that the Fair Rent Commission is the only entity in New Haven that fights a stand for veterans in terms of, I said, wow, in reference to renters being evicted. And so the thing is, besides housing court, I think Fair Rent Fair Rent Commission is it. I get emotional around this because I waited here for 2 hours to make sure I could say my part. I could have written this in. I chose to come because I want you to get my energy and I want you to understand the expression of a commissioner. Fair Rent Commissioner has to have some integrity around what we do. We deal with all kinds of cases. I've seen so many different things, heartbreaking, where we could not, our hands are tied. We couldn't do anything. Verbiage, language. All we can do was in the purview of what's in the papers. So I just want you guys to really, really strongly consider what we're asking. It's not unfair, unreasonable. Actually, it's just bringing things up to date so that we can function better. And it's really, again, these are our tools. This is all we have. We have nothing else to work with, right? So I thank you and acknowledge you for what you do in your jobs. And here's one time I want you to really get something really closely and say, okay, we understand, and push it forward. Thank you for your time. Everybody enjoy the rest of your evening. If I don't see you guys again, happy holidays.
Thank you, Commissioner Bond.
Thank you.
Are there any questions?
I'm sorry.
Just have a comment about me.
Right now,
It's really important, because he's a veteran, if I may.
is it
Madam Chair.
related to the item at hand?
It's related to the person who has,
I think,
thank you, Madam Chair.
thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? All right, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me again.
And next on our list, we have Cynthia Viegda. Excellent, thank you so much. Good evening. Please state your name and address for the record, and then you have 3 minutes to testify.
Diga su nombre y su dirección claramente.
Okay,
Oh, and just make sure to use your microphone.
Nada más para que se escuche bien el micrófono.
32 Sunset Ridge, apartment 259, New Haven, Connecticut, 06513.
Su nombre.
Cynthia Vega Vieira.
Va a tener 3 minutos para testificar.
Okay. Yo también quiero apoyar a que se haga justicia, ¿verdad?, por las personas que necesitan la ayuda, ¿no? Y más especialmente para las mujeres.
I want to testify in support for the injustice and support for women's rights and women who are renting.
Especialmente porque piensan que como mujeres no sabemos defendernos y no.
And we think that as women, we don't know how to defend ourselves or advocate for ourselves.
Ellos se metieron a mi unidad por yo pedir la ayuda a Fair Rent Commission. Y
Because I filed with Fair Rent Commission, the landlord came in and started to look through our apartment.
nunca me han dado algún escrito para poder entrar a mi unidad. Simplemente llegan, entran porque quieren, ya.
Sorry, I was going to speak to you in Spanish. They never ever notified her with enough notice. They just knock on the door or just use the keys to enter to her apartment and force their way in.
No letter.
I'm sorry?
There was no letter.
There was no letters, no verbal notification or anything.
Sí, y ellos, cuando yo llené el complaint con la comisión de renta y yo les pedía estar en el apartamento para revisar cómo los de mantenimiento hacían el trabajo, no querían tampoco.
When she finally was starting to advocate for herself and request that she should be present when there were any sort of inspections or walkthrough, they completely denied and did not allow her to have any voice in it.
Ellos creen que porque son de mantenimiento o son hombres, las mujeres no sabemos cómo mirar lo que están haciendo mal cuando sí lo sabemos.
Often because of her gender as a woman, and they would send male operators or maintenance staff who would then mansplain what was going on and would make her feel like as a woman she would not have the visual eye to determine what was going on.
Yo pido que por favor examinen todos los casos, especialmente porque la mayoría de todos esos casos son más mujeres.
She's requesting that you guys, as alders, really view all the cases that the Fair Rent Commission sees. The majority in her experience have been women who are going through the same experiences.
Ellos pensaron que como yo había sufrido violencia doméstica y vivo sola completamente, no iba a poder.
Sorry, translation's also taking it.
You'll give her more time, Madam Chair. because
Yes,
it's technical.
please. Yes.
Ellos pensaron que como yo había sufrido violencia doméstica yo no, y vivía sola en mi apartamento, yo no iba a saber qué hacer. Y pienso que ellos, la property manager, cuando yo estudié el caso de ella junto con el abogado, mi esposo es un veterano que sufría de estrés postraumático.
She's a domestic violence survivor, and she believes that because she had disclosed that to her landlords and her property manager, that made her feel like she didn't have or was equipped to deal with those type of scenarios. She's now explaining a little bit about her ex-husband who did serve and was suffering of PTSD during the time of violence.
Durante los hearings, y cuando mandaban los emails, me pude dar de cuenta que el abogado de ellos es un veterano y que Joana, yo creo que tiene un degree en neuroscience, no estoy 100% segura, pero no sabían que al yo haber atravesado por violencia doméstica, especialmente con un veterano, yo me pude dar cuenta de la estrategia que ellos estaban usando.
So she's explaining that opposing counsel, when she was in informal hearings within the Parent Commission, had also served and was some sort of military branch, and that made her feel like opposing counsel had some sort of tactical advantage that they were trying to utilize against her during that time.
No, eso creo que es todo, pero sí pienso que se examine cada caso meticulosamente.
And she's saying that it's very important that each case is really reviewed and that all items are reviewed meticulously to ensure that we really understand the cases that were in front of us.
Ya, estoy en contra de las represalias en contra de las mujeres.
Against any injustices related to women.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you so much.
No, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And last on our list, certainly not last, we have Kat Calhoun. Good evening. Please state your name and address for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes to testify.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, honorable alders. My name is Kat Calhoun. I live at 288 Eastern Street. And although I was the QEMT chair for 2 years, the only thing I knew about livable cities was their blight management. And at a pop-up meeting, August of 23, I learned more about LCI, and that was my first introduction to Fair Rent Commission. It was suggested that I might pursue both of those. I didn't feel I really needed to go that way. I was still hopeful the landlord would communicate and take care of some things. But in November, when they offered us a $300 a month rent increase, that was 20%. We felt, okay, it's time to bring in LCI and file a fair rent. So we did that. And I'm very thankful for the neutral position that Ms. Bermudez held in bringing the pieces together and asking for data and giving the landlord so much time to take care of things. As has been mentioned earlier this evening, typically they have 3 or 21 days, depending on how egregious the violation is. We are now, next Saturday, November 16th, will be 1 year since our LCI inspection, and some of the egregious negligence is still not corrected, yet their attorney asserts that it is. I can't close my sliding doors. It's a half-inch gap, and it's going to be cold tonight. So we went to Fair Rent Commission. The process took us 6 months, and without all the details, the commissioners decided in their ruling to reduce our rent 75% because of the egregious negligence and things still not handled, plus we were 28 days without heat during that time. And some of those things are still not handled. So we are very thankful for the process. And now that we are going through the housing court process, we are even more thankful for Fair Rent, because Fair Rent at least treats us like human beings. We feel very shut down by the housing court process. It's very hostile. And let's see, yeah, so we're basically a year, and building code violations are still not handled. So in the proposal that's before you tonight, I support everything completely. But the 3 points I'd like to address specifically are land records. We are under our third property owner in 8 years on the same unit. The first owner sold the properties to 2 gentlemen who kept it for 2 years and then sold it. So if we had known about LCI's building code enforcement and Fair Rent Commission and land records issue was there, the new owners would have bought the property knowing that we had issues. But we didn't know our tenant rights, we didn't know Fair Rent Commission, et cetera. So now, several of my friends, one attorney who's moved out of the area, have said these owners will probably sell before they fix. And in 1 year, we think so. I have 2 more comments if you'll indulge me.
I will, yes.
Okay. Reinspect. Fair Rent hasn't asked to reinspect, but since their decision, we have had 2 LCI fails on the reinspect. And last week I called Thursday, I called Friday, I called yesterday, and today, and still, well, actually yesterday was a holiday. Saying voicemails, emails, et cetera, and no LCI inspection yet. We want it. And retaliation, thankfully, we have not been subject to retaliation other than not fixing gaping holes in the siding and other issues. But we expect when the 1-year protection we have from Fair Rent Commission expires, we will not be offered a lease because if they don't fix things for us, they don't talk to us and they don't agree with us. It's the writing on the wall. Vision 2034, I went to some of the public hearings and work table groups. The #1 complaint that I heard across the groups was the problems with absent landlords. And that's what you're hearing tonight, and that's what Fair Rent Commission hears, and that's why tenant unions are organizing. Our first landlord lived on property. We could talk to her. Things weren't perfect, but we could talk to her. And it's gone down and down with each subsequent change in ownership. Thank you for indulging me the extra moments and listening. And I would be happy to answer questions because almost every point that came up, we have dealt with in this process.
Oh my, thank you so much for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you so much for your testimony. And I'm so sorry to hear about all those issues.
Oh, and you got a short version.
I will ask, are there any other members of the public here wishing to testify on this item? For a second time, are there any members of the public present who are wishing to testify? Please come forward. Good evening. If you please state your name and address for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. My name is Commissioner Don J. Roberts. I'm a commissioner on the Fair Rent Commission. I didn't expect to testify, but I did submit a letter in support. So I guess I'll just briefly read off.
And we do have that. Just
Oh,
to
great.
point folks to Commissioner Roberts' paper, or letter. Thank you.
Okay, well, you already have it, so I won't read it out. Yeah, I support many of the changes that are being proposed. And even though I just joined the commission this year, I think that I've been able to see a lot of the gaps that these rules would cover. And I think that, you know, we do a tough job of trying to hold some of the bad actors accountable. Unfortunately, we see some of the same bad actors over and over and over again. And our goal is to hold those bad actors accountable and to protect tenants and to ensure that, you know, when people are purchasing real estate, that they know what they're getting into. And it's kind of a consumer protection thing also too, right? So it's multifaceted. We think that by allowing some of these changes, it will also make things run more effective, more efficiently. I believe that we receive more complaints than any other fair rent commission in the state, or at least 2 complaints a day, I think I read. So these will definitely help, so we could protect tenants in our city. And that's all I have to say. Any questions?
Any questions? Thank you so much for your
Great.
testimony. Are there any other members of the public present wishing to testify? For a second time, are there any members of the public present wishing to testify on this item? And for a third and final time, are there any members of the public present wishing to testify on this item? All right, Alderman Shawn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for the presenters, if you would permit them to come forward.
Yes, if they would please come back.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, I must ask for you to please state your names and addresses of the record once more.
Elise Bermudez, 233 Front Street, New Haven.
Attorney Joseph Murley, Corporation Counsel's Office, City of New Haven.
Thank you for sticking around and for coming back up. I'm back at 12 3/4-10C around the issue of having an open order. I think it reads that not in the way that you need it to. And what do I mean by that? Well, this paragraph, it's a long sentence with 5 things that could be listed as harassment or as retaliation. Revoking an offer to renew a lease, bringing in an action or proceeding against the tenant, demanding an increase in rent, decreasing the services, etc. And then harassing the tenant because the tenant has filed a complaint in front of these various different things, right? So those are the 5 things that are listed there. And then there's a comma, and it says within 6 months after the filing of such complaint. So that's like an adverbial phrase, a prepositional phrase that actually creates a time frame, right? Or having an open order. To me, that second part needs more words, because if you eliminate, because it's or, it means you can take out the first one and then the second one should still stand. So if you have this long sentence and then it ends with having an open order, that's not how you would word it. You would say, while an order of the commission is still open, subject to this property, or something. You would say it that way. But the way it's worded now, it looks like it's an object of a preposition. It looks like it's within 6 months after having an open order, the way that parallel construction works.
Right.
So if it's not going to be an object of that preposition, then it needs to have its own preposition or its own words to fill it out in terms of what it actually means. That's why I was asking, is it within 6 months after having an open order?
Yeah.
So the wording, I think we got to change it because it's vulnerable the way it's written. So I want you to tell us exactly what it should, if you ignore the within the 6 months after the filing of such complaint, let's just ordinary order for a minute. We'll put it back in. How should it be worded?
We welcome your amendments. I think you just mentioned a potential way that we can rephrase it. And I believe we're in agreement, if I'm not mistaken,
Yeah.
for council.
Yeah, I agree. I certainly see your point and how it can be interpreted that way, and I think it does need to be tweaked. And you did make a suggestion that I think.
Well, so part of this is your intent. So which agencies' orders would you want to count? Not just the Fair Rent Commission's agency.
LCI, health, fire, building.
Right, against that, but only against that property, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So then you could say, or while an order of these aforementioned city agencies remain open against that landlord on that property. Is that what you mean?
That was the intent. That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Well, then I think we ought to do that. I just wanted to make sure that if I propose such an amendment, that you're cool with it and that it it's gonna mean what you want it to mean.
We appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alderman Shaw. I just want to welcome our Alder Board, Alder Hubbard, who's joined us. Any questions from Kevin? Seeing none, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
I will, we'll have to, sorry. Thank you. So we'll start the public process all over again. So are there any members of the public wishing to testify on this item? Are there any members of the public wishing to testify on this item? For a third time, are there any members of the public wishing to testify on this item? Alder Phil.
Madam Chair, I move that we close the public portion of this meeting.
Okay.
Item has been, sorry. Motion has been second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? We have closed the public portion. Alder Furlow.
Madam Chair, I move item number 1.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All right. Item has been moved in second. Discussion. Alder Furlow.
Madam Chair, I move that we amend by substitution the text amendment, or I should just say the red line version that has come before us by city staff.
Second.
Excellent, thank you. Item has been moved in second. Is discussion on the item. Alder Furlow.
So let me just speak first on the importance of city staff submitting a full order. Once it comes to us in our package, that's what we're voting on. And so it's important that city staff presents to us the order, the ordinance amendment, the wherefore clause, or the resolution, and also that the letter that is attached that goes to the president is addressed correctly, correctly addressed. It should go to the president of the Board of Alders, not Miss, but to the president, and that will be helpful in keeping our package in order. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alder Furlow. Any other discussion on this first item? All right, seeing none, so we are, there has been an amendment made, and so all those in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? So you're back to the item as amended. Any discussion? Alder Marshall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to speak in favor of this item. I think it is a good idea for the city to move in the direction that our state legislature moved in. I think it was a law that was responding to a crisis in early education and daycare spots in our state, which is really pressing. And so even though our zoning is subject to the Special Act of 1923, or whatever the date is, I think it's a good idea for us to move with the rest of the state in this way. I do understand questions that colleagues ask. They're very good questions. They're on parking. And so for a moment in our consideration of the item, I was thinking, should we propose to change those parking requirements? And I don't think we could do that right now. The way the zoning works, if you make a major change, you really need to notice it and give people a chance to chime in it. And since the changing of parking requirements was not part of the submission, if we acted on it tonight, we would be acting on it without input from the public about something that could be significant for future development. So, but that is something that we as a board could think about and offer as a subsequent submission if we feel like somehow the parking requirements are not robust enough for these establishments. It's worth perhaps some study. But I don't think we could or should do that now. And so having said that, I'm in favor of us moving this forward with a favorable recommendation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alder Marchand. Alder Freda.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a feeling that my colleague was looking at my notes. But I am in support of this ordinance amendment. I think overall it was a good move, and I do believe that at some point we're going to have to look at this parking situation. Parking is a problem in our city, and to have additional cars parked on streets, we'll have to figure that out. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alder. Any further? Alder Sager.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm also in support of this item. I think it responds to what our chair mentioned earlier and colleagues have said is a crisis with childcare across the state. It's so expensive, there just aren't good options available, and family and group childcare is often more affordable and more neighborhood-based, easier for people to access because it's in the community, maybe down the street. Maybe somebody who's taking care of a few children in their home in the neighborhood. So these are the type of options we really need more of in New Haven and across Connecticut. I actually, through my work at Connecticut Voice for Children, was involved in the state law that was passed that directed towns around Connecticut to change their zoning to allow more family and group child care homes. So I'm very excited that we are moving in this direction, and thanks city staff for putting it forward to the board, and I encourage colleagues to support. Thank you. And I also will say I agree with my colleagues that the parking considerations are something we need to keep looking at. And it's also a bigger conversation about the residential parking enforcement that I hear all the time from constituents. So appreciate the comments there as well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alder. Any further discussion?
Madam Chair.
Alder Rodriguez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too am in support of this item and also take into account the observations and all of the important comments shared on the part of this item from my colleagues, and I'm in support of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The item passes. Alder Freda.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move item 2.
Second.
Item is moved and second discussion. Alder Marchand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just briefly remind myself that this is important zoning housekeeping to do, that we are called to do by our own zoning ordinance and our special act. And I'm grateful for the work that the city staff did to tidy up our use tables in particular, so that they're less confusing and we don't have redundant and potentially conflicting references. And I also think it's great that we are making sure that those tables reflect recent changes that this body made to update our ordinance. And I encourage colleagues to vote favorably. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll move to it. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The item passed. Alder Freda.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move item 3.
Second.
The item has been moved in second discussion.
Yes.
Alder Freda.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that we amend by substitution the information that has been set before us this evening.
Second.
The item has been moved in second discussion on the amendment only. All those, Alder Marchand.
Just to recap, in our memo from our staff, there were 4 additional changes. And so this is the version that Alder Furlow is moving is, I think, pages 70 to to 80, 72 to 80, something like that. And it includes 4 additional changes that colleagues can see on page 6 of the memo from our staff. And so this amendment incorporates those additional changes. And I think they make sense, although I may have more to say about one of them momentarily. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Shaw. All those in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions? Any opposed? Any abstentions? And pass your back to the item as amended. Alderman Shaw and then Alder Furlow.
I move to amend section 12 and 3/4-10C.
Item has been moved in second discussion. Alderman Shaw.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to be abundantly clear, this was what I was asking the staff about, the presenters about. And so if colleagues would look at page 79 of the packet our staff provided, you'll see section 12:10 subsection C, and you'll see those red words, or having an open order. My amendment would replace those 4 or 5 words with the following words. Or while an order of any of these city agencies against the landlord on the property in question remains open. I think that more accurately reflects the intent of the makers, and it's more clear, and I encourage colleagues to vote in favor of this amendment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alderman Shaw. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, we will vote on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? We are back to the item as amended. Any further discussion? Alder Furlow.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As advised by the committee or by our staff, I move to amend section 12:2-1, which is found on page 6 of our package.
Second.
Item has moved in second discussion on the amendment. Alder Furlow.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to just remind committee that we will be hearing at some point all of the boards and commissions and getting them realigned and putting them in their correct order and perhaps making some changes to their structure and how they're run. But this one, it does say that the mayor shall appoint a chair and vice chair. And so I'd like to change that language, and I wrote it down. I don't have it up. So I'd like to change the language to say that the chair and vice chair shall be appointed by the committee by majority vote.
Shall be elected by the commission.
Shall be
Elected by the members of the commission.
Shall be elected by the members of the commission by majority vote. And this should be how all of our boards and commissions should run.
Alder Furlow.
Nope, we just need discussion.
All right. So all those in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Any,
Well, we need to have some discussion on that. We need to have discussion.
That's right. I apologize.
Nope, we're good. We're good.
Discussion on the amendment. Alder
I agree we should do this and encourage colleagues to vote yes. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alder. Any further discussion on the amendment? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The amendment passes. We are back to the item as amended. further discussion?
Madam Chair, if we can take just 30 seconds.
Yep.
As we're looking at the second suggested amendment. It's this section here. I didn't agree with that.
Okay.
As well. We can look at further amendments after. That's our choice. There's just one that I'm just not quite sure of, which city staff had suggested. And it's just the language that I'm not quite sure about. So we do have the option, Madam Chair, to make the second amendment by the time it hits the floor.
Okay.
Just get a little bit of more clarity on the language.
Excellent. All right, thank you, Dr. Furlong. Is there any additional discussion? Alder Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank the city staff, the Director of our Family Commission, representative from the Corporation Council for the presentation. It was well organized and it was very helpful. I think the Family Commission has done some tremendous work in recent years. We've, as a board, updated the amendment, giving it more hours, but we've also increased staffing of the Family Commission in recent years. I anticipate hearing more about that in March, probably in April. It's an important function of our government to provide that protection and that forum for residents to be able to get some justice around unfair conditions. Affordable housing and quality affordable housing is one of the key elements of our legislative agenda. And I think that these steps are going to make the commission more effective in protecting residents, providing clarity for landlords as well. And so I encourage my colleagues to vote favorably on this item. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Sean. Alder Rodriguez.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I too am in support of this item. I find that the Figure Act Commission has done tremendous work and that this is an element of defense and also an opportunity for landlords and tenants to work together and to keep more individuals housed, not unhoused. And lastly, I'd like to take the opportunity, respecting the Robert Rules of Order and respecting you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank our Commissioner Monk for the work for serving our country and protecting our freedoms. Yesterday was Veterans Day, and we have one before us today. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alder. Any further discussion? Alder David?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with my colleagues and in support of this item. I think that the Fair Rent Commission does very, very important work to keep tenants in our city safe and make sure that we're holding landlords accountable who are not living up to their responsibilities to provide safe and quality housing to tenants. I also want to thank Executive Director Bermudez and her team for all their work on this, and also for the approach that they are taking to the Fair Rent Commission, where they're trying to reach solutions to all, apologies, they're trying to reach solutions that through the Fair Rent Commission to make sure that tenants can maintain safe housing, that landlords are able to provide that, and they're working collaboratively, which I think is very important. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alder. Any further discussion? Seeing none, let's proceed to vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The act passes. Alder Furlong.
Madam Chair, I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Item has moved in second. All those in favor of going home, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? We are adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure I got that question.
Testimony. Very good.